The following programme includes descriptions of child sexual exploitation and trafficking. The content may be upsetting for some viewers. A decade ago, people in Britain woke up to shocking news. In the small northern town of Rotherham, 1,400 young girls had been groomed, abused, trafficked and raped.
I can't tell you how many rapes that I've had.
And I want to see chief constables, I want to see senior officials held legally to account for their neglect of duty.
When I was still 14, Andrea took me to the promenade in the town where we met the Pakistani kebab house workers, and then 5 or 6 of them gang raped me.
I was locked in there for 10 weeks.
The abuse had gone on for decades, and nobody responsible had been punished. The police and council had turned a blind eye to the abuse, or even blamed the raped girls.
That we sit here today in 2022, and not one person has ever been held accountable for what happened in this town.
Most of the victims were white. Most of the abusers were ethnically Pakistani. Fears of being seen as racist had contributed to a cover-up.
They were failing them because they were prioritising social cohesion over the victims of actual crimes.
Over the following years, similar stories emerged across the nation of underage girls abused in taxis, kebab shops, and housing estates.
There were 3 kebab houses in the town, and they all knew each other, and they linked up when they raped me.
To find out the truth about the Grooming Gangs scandal, I had to go back to the beginning. It started with a journalist at the Times called Andrew Norfolk. He first encountered the Grooming Gangs in 2003, when Labour MP Anne Cryer revealed local concerns about Asian men targeting teenage girls outside school gates. He admitted later that a story about ethnic minorities targeting white girls felt like a far-right fantasy. Liberal guilt kicked in, so he wrote one story and dropped it. But over the years, he kept encountering similar stories. His conscience nagged him, and in 2010, he began to research court records. What he found was a pattern. Abusers would meet girls in public places. They would give them gifts or take them out on joyrides until they felt like the man was their boyfriend. Then they'd give them alcohol or drugs and rape them. Often, they trafficked the girls between their family and friends, to be raped by them too. The girls were mostly white, the abusers mainly Pakistani. When Andrew Norfolk approached the authorities, they all refused to speak to him. Finally, he found a group who would speak to him. They were called Risky Business, and they were based in Rotherham. I went there to meet Jane Senior, the former manager of the Youth Project, and the whistleblower who exposed the scandal.
My name's Jane Senior. I'm currently the Chief Exec at a charity in Rotherham that covers lots of different areas. I've been a youth worker for most of my working life and ended my career with Rotherham Borough Council, manage a project that we called Risky Business Project that predominantly worked with girls that were involved in child sexual exploitation.
Jane helped Norfolk get hold of the serious case review for the murder of Laura Wilson. Aged just 17, she'd been stabbed 40 times by ex-boyfriend Ashtiak Ashgar after she told his family about their relationship. Her body was thrown in a canal, and she was described as the first white victim of an honour killing. But the review revealed that Laura had been groomed and abused by Pakistani men from an early age. With an IQ of just 58, She'd been failed by 15 different agencies responsible for her care. Rotherham Council censored the report, then threatened to use a High Court injunction to stop the publication of uncensored extracts. Jane said that the council wanted to present Laura as the victim of an honour killing, rather than admit that she'd been groomed. Risky Business had been set up to help local women at risk of exploitation, but they soon found that Laura's case was not in isolation. Gangs were systematically targeting underage girls in Rotherham. The gangs were organised and violent. One 15-year-old girl was sexually assaulted with a broken bottle. A 13-year-old was found drinking vodka in a house full of men after neighbours reported her screams. Even when Risky Business reported the abuse to the authorities, nothing was done. But they did offer a 12-year-old victim language lessons in the Punjabi and Urdu used by her abusers. To find out what that was like, I needed to speak to one of the victims.
I think it all started when I started secondary school. I was actually targeted and bullied. I met this female on the street because she was really 30 years older than myself. Naively, I started going to her flat, and after a while, I was locked in there for 10 weeks.
The woman who lured Elizabeth to the flat was already a person of interest to the police. She was known by up to 4 different aliases. She had once set up a fake rape crisis centre and a fake hotline to lure children into sexual exploitation. But the police failed to stop her. In fact, they let her continue to work for taxi firms in Rotherham as she tried to set up a cab company for taking children to school.
She started bringing males to the house. That's obviously when things started happening, the rapes and things like that. It was absolutely horrendous. She was very controlling, very manipulative. I was given quite a lot of alcohol. Yeah, I was intoxicated more than I was sober, to be honest. It was the same thing every day. It was so like getting up, getting drunk, the men come in, and that was it. And then it'd start again.
During her horrifying ordeal, Elizabeth came to the attention of Risky Business, a Rotherham Council youth project managed by Jane Senior.
I had a database where we had intelligence that we would put in there on a daily basis, and I'd get lots of things that were said to me in meetings, such as these children were consenting, they were making informed choices, they were returning to their abusers, they wouldn't make a good witness if it went to court, and also we were breaching a human rights issue. But it was never the human rights of the children, it was the human rights of the perpetrators. Elizabeth's
abusers were all linked. One of them was the uncle of one of the town's most prolific rapists.
I never left the building, the flat. Yeah, very chaotic for a 14-year-old. I can't tell you how many rapes that I've had.
Despite the known links between rapists, South Yorkshire Police failed to act.
Every time anybody new came into a senior role, we kind of thought, this is it now, something's going to happen, something's going to change. So I'd sit in lots of meetings and I would share all the information, as my staff would. And we had car registration numbers, names, nicknames, addresses, properties of concern. So we kind of collated a raft of that information that we kept, and we kept it in a database. And we get lots of reasons, and people still say to me today, why did they actually do nothing? And I can't give you the absolute answer to that. All I can tell you is what they said at the time. The children were consenting. The children wouldn't make good witnesses if they went to court.
But Elizabeth's suffering was not consensual. She was being exploited by a ruthless gang of rapists. Elizabeth took me back to the flat, where she was kept and abused for 10 weeks. Eventually she was freed, but it wasn't the police that rescued her. It was Risky Business.
I walked out of there 5.5 stone. Loads of marks. I was just a skeleton, really. I came out, Truly it is. I don't think so. They let her get away with murder.
Elizabeth's story didn't. In 2000, taxi driver Jahangir Akhtar facilitated a deal between police officer Hassan Ali and career criminal Arshid Hussain. Arshid had kidnapped and raped a girl of 14. He agreed to hand her over to the police at a petrol station. In return, the police wouldn't arrest him. A few months later, taxi driver Jahangir became a Labour councillor. Over the years, he would rise to become the deputy leader of the council and vice chair of the Police and Crime Panel, which oversaw South Yorkshire Police. More evidence of incompetence by local authorities was uncovered when journalist Andrew Norfolk saw a series of reports from 2001 to 2006. They catalogued the activities of grooming gangs in Rotherham. One of those reports was written by solicitor Adele Weir, who was asked to conduct a Home Office study on child prostitution, based in the risky business offices. But what she found was an abuse ring centred around Arshid Hussain. She found at least 270 victims, 18 of them named Arshid as their supposed boyfriend. Despite collecting the names of suspects and details on their crimes, the police failed to act, even though the rapists were also dealing drugs.
So no longer was it risky business, the youth workers saying it, the children saying it. Now somebody that would been paid to actually review the police files, the council files and risky business files and health files, actually put together a report to say this is happening.
In 2001, Adele went with a young girl who'd been raped to report it to the police.
Yeah, so one of our children just made the decision that she couldn't take it anymore, she'd had enough, and she was willing to speak to the police. So Adele made the decision that she'd actually take her to the police station and support her through that, speaking to the police.
While at the police station, her main abuser contacted her to say that he had her 11-year-old sister. The gang had already broken her brother's legs. Frightened, she dropped the complaint, saying, "You can't protect me." How the abuser found out that she was in the police station has never been explained. When Adele Weir complained to the police, she was told to never do it again.
Adele wrote the letter to the Chief Constable. We ended up being called into Rotherham Police Station and spent about an hour being trapped like naughty schoolgirls while the district commander and other people that were in the room just shouted at us and said it was inappropriate and people like us didn't write to Chief Constables.
Deterring victims from accessing support wasn't the only way that justice was obstructed.
Where risky business were based and accessing our office was nigh on impossible. We had files that went missing, the laptop and the computer never went missing, just Adele's paperwork and also some minutes of a meeting that Adele had attended had been changed to a different day on the computer.
Who was responsible has never been explained. But with the risky business security procedures, the break-in had all the hallmarks of an inside job. The intruder was almost certainly someone working for Rotherham Council. Following her revelations, Adele was suspended, then barred from conducting further research or meeting victims until her contract ended. One council official told her never to refer to Asian men in her report and booked her on a 2-day equality and diversity course.
Talk about not liking the contents of a report, so rather than act on the information in the report, let's go for the writer.
Abandoned by those sworn to protect them, the fathers of some victims took matters into their own hands, only to find themselves being blocked by the authorities while the rapists went unpunished. I met with Jack, Elizabeth's father, who tried to rescue her from her 10 weeks of hell.
I phoned my daughter's worker, explained what had gone off. She told me not to go back to the flat. I said, no, I'm going, I've got to get her out. She turned around to me, and I have had some stick over this, asking why does a father leave his child in an house where she's being abused. She said, what it is, if Elizabeth or any other girls are in that flat, are not in that flat, sorry, and you'll go in, wherever they are, you're putting them at risk. And I went, what do you mean at risk? She went, serious harm or even death. You're going to risk getting your daughter killed and other people's daughters killed.
Continued revelations about Rotherham outraged the public. Keir Starmer, then Director of Public Prosecutions, said that a generation of girls had been failed. Under pressure, Rotherham Council commissioned social worker Alexis J to lead an inquiry. It found that a conservative estimate of 1,400 girls in Rotherham had been raped over 2 decades by the gangs. It found that the council and police had turned a blind eye. It also confirmed that most of the abusers were Pakistani, despite making up only 3% of the town's population. There are also local Pakistani girls who were abused, but they often refused to speak to the police for fear of damaging their marriage prospects. In the aftermath of the report, many of the council's leaders resigned. The inquiry was on the front page of 10 British newspapers and made news worldwide.
And then we all know that day in August 2014 when Alexis J's report came out. It weren't even national news, it weren't international, it were worldwide news. And the world woke up to what we are now probably known as the worst child abuse scandal in the modern world.
With the council in disgrace, the government commissioned civil servant Louise Casey to investigate. The 2015 Casey report discovered a council in denial, refusing to believe that 1,400 girls in the town had been abused. The report blamed political correctness for the council's failures. Statistics on ethnicity were removed. Pakistani taxi drivers were described as men of a certain ethnicity engaged in a particular occupation. Despite reports going back to the 1990s, only one gang had been convicted. In 2010, with the help of risky business. It was called Operation Central.
What happened then is they called a meeting to discuss the concerns that I'd raised, and a police officer that was there, it was only a young police officer, he decided to put all this intelligence together, put it all onto the police system and take it to his sergeant. I met with his sergeant, Rupert Chang, who I think is Rotherham's unsung hero.
Rupert Chang's operation saw 5 men convicted, but 80 suspects had been identified. Clearly, the police needed to push on, but they didn't.
Throughout that, we was told that Central 2 would come straight after Central 1. And then as soon as Central 1 had ended, we were told there were no more resources, it were too resource intensive, and that was it. But we could have done so much more.
Why did the police and council fail to kick on with their success? Casey's report suggested a widespread culture of denial and ignorance. Social workers accepted it as normal that underage girls were taking drugs, being made to give sexual services, and having pregnancies or abortions. Of one 13-year-old, given alcohol and abused, they wrote, "She needs more appropriate friends and interests to fill her time." The girl's parents eventually had to move overseas to escape the menace of their rape gang tormentors. After the Casey report's release in 2015, more arrests were finally made. Arshid Hussain, the rapist who handed over an abused girl to PC Hassan Ali at a petrol station, was convicted with his 3 brothers and his uncle, as well as 2 white women, who lured girls to their homes and pimped them out to the rapists. On the day that PC Ali was told he was under police investigation, he was run over and killed by a family friend. Any investigation into his alleged criminality died with him. The National Crime Agency also launched an ongoing investigation into historic abuse in Rotherham, the largest in their history. So far, they have identified 1,510 victims and hundreds of abusers. Another 20 men have been convicted for their crimes in Rotherham alone. The Casey report singled out councillor Jahangir Akhtar for his malign influence after he arranged the handover of the raped girl at the petrol station. The Labour Party forced him to resign. Years later, his daughter was given a job at a council-funded charity, giving her access to a database with confidential information on grooming gang victims. There was no suggestion that she did anything wrong, but victims said there was a potential conflict of interest. After the Casey report revealed council failures, an investigation into the police was launched by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. They found that the father of a girl who was raped in Clifton Park and suffered internal injuries was told by a police officer that he hoped it would teach her a lesson. They found that police officers, finding girls in bed with older men or even in the middle of a sex act, failed to do anything. Worried parents were told that having an Asian boyfriend was just a fashion accessory their daughters would grow out of. There were 265 allegations of misconduct, with 91 investigations involving 47 officers. Of those, only 5 suffered any penalties. Nobody was fired. To find out why nobody in the police had been punished, I went to see the only whistleblower to resign from the police over the rape gang's cover-up. My name is Charlie Peters. I'm a journalist and documentary filmmaker with GBNews, and I'm investigating the National Grooming Gangs scandal. We've seen what happened in Rotherham, where over 1,500 girls were sexually exploited. I want to know why the police looked the other way, despite years of evidence.
I couldn't get any answers. All I was told was that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute.
I was raped over 1,000 times and I don't even know how many men assaulted me. It's impossible to recall. It was just so constant.
Men.
Greater Manchester did have a problem with grooming gangs. The little girl who died, Victoria Agoglia, was 15 years old when in 2003 she was groomed by a rape gang and then killed by a heroin overdose given to her by an abuser.
We had dozens of young, very vulnerable children who were mainly in care, well, they were all living in care, who were being systematically groomed and raped by gangs of Pakistani men.
Over 18 months, Maggie and her team compiled a compelling case against the gangs they knew were operating in Rochdale. But she had to take a break from the investigation when her husband fell terminally ill.
And at that point, we had 100 paedophiles on a database that we knew were raping children. We had about 3 dozen children that we had identified as being abused. So that job was a full singing and dancing major investigation. You know, my job was done and I went off work content and happy to know that those men were going to be prosecuted.
But when Maggie returned from compassionate leave after the death of her husband, she found that Operation Augusta had been closed down. None of the abusers were convicted.
I couldn't get any answers. All I was told was that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. And I knew, because I had been working on that job from day one, I knew we had the evidence.
The last information placed on the police database for the operation was on the 6th of July 2005, one day before the 7/7 terror attacks in London.
There was a gold level meeting within GMP, and that means the most senior officers in GMP, that they had a meeting and that the decision was made at that meeting that they were not prepared to put resources into that investigation.
Was it shut down because revealing the grooming gangs just after an Islamist attack was considered too incendiary? We'll never know, because those minutes were conveniently lost. Years later, Maggie was brought back in for a new operation to tackle the gangs.
I was reapproached in 2010 and asked to go on board a case in Rochdale, which became known as Operation Span.
Maggie was asked to join the team to gain the trust of a young girl called Ruby, who, aged just 12, had been raped by known paedophile Adil Khan.
When she was just 13, she had been made pregnant by that man. And the police at the time, which had been 2 years previous to that, had seized a fetus.
But despite having the frozen fetus and the DNA needed to prove the identity of Ruby's rapist, Adil Khan was not charged with rape.
Ruby, you know, we had a fetus. We knew who had made her pregnant, but the authorities failed to protect her. The schools knew, social services knew, the police knew. And even though we all knew, even though we had DNA, even though we knew who was responsible, that man was still never charged with rape.
Ruby's suffering extended to her family. She had a sister, Amber, who had also become a victim of the rape gangs.
Amber had been arrested as a child of 15 on suspicion of being a madam. I was asked to gain her trust and ask her to tell us what had happened, to identify the abusers, to tell us of the locations, the phone numbers.
One of those locations was an address in Fallinge, where there was a house with a list on the back of the door, with about 20 names on it. Abusers could take girls there, pass them around to be raped by multiple men, and then leave a tick by their names to show that they'd used the rape house. At the end of the week or month, they'd pay their bill for using it. It was like a paedophile honesty box. Despite the scale of the crimes, the trial was limited and just 9 men were convicted. The lead defendant said he objected to being tried by an all-white jury. The same man had once forced a 15-year-old girl to have sex with his nephew as a birthday present. By 2017, all but 2 of the 9 were out of prison, having been released halfway through their sentences. 4 of them had also been granted millions of pounds in legal aid to fight deportation. Their victims have to live with their abusers, walking around as free men. They see them in the street. They see them at work. They see them in the supermarket. Both Rotherham and Rochdale are similar in culture and history, former industrial towns in the north of England. But this national scandal scarred towns and cities of all descriptions across the country. My investigation took me to Telford, a new town in leafy Shropshire, near the Welsh border, where another child sexual exploitation scandal had emerged. It's here that an inquiry in 2022 found that 1,000 girls had been abused by the gangs since the 1980s. Much of the worst abuse happened in the suburb of Wellington. Children were sold for sex in a rape den. Some council workers reacted by saying that child prostitution had always happened. The gangs here often threatened their victims with the memory of Lucy Lowe, who, aged just 15, was burnt to death with her mother, sister and unborn child by her abuser. To find out why Telford Council had also failed to act, I spoke to Samantha Smith, a child abuse victim from the town.
I remember when I was 16, my social worker told me that if you were physically abused, why were there no bruises? And that perfectly sums up how I was treated by those in positions of power.
The ignorance and victim blaming that Samantha was subjected to from Telford social workers was eerily similar to the culture exposed by the Casey report into Rotherham Borough Council.
The culture was exactly the same. It was the idea that girls like me were somehow responsible for the abuse we suffered.
The council here didn't just turn a blind eye, it was incompetent. Teams failed to share information, staffing issues meant that there were never enough people to do the work, and the council tried to close down a child abuse unit, citing austerity. But political correctness played a role here too. When teachers confessed that there was a problem in this authority with Pakistani youths abusing girls, they were accused of being racist by a council worker. Detailed reports weren't shared over fears that they could start a race riot. I spoke to another victim of child abuse in Telford. Emily, not her real name, prefers not to appear on camera, but these are her words, spoken by an actor.
At college, I met Andrea, who was a little bit older, and she introduced me to local Pakistani men who worked in the kebab house in my town in South Wales. We would just go to the kebab house where we'd receive free food, free drink, free cigarettes, free alcohol. It was all just a treat for us, which we loved as young girls. When I was still 14, Andrea took me to the promenade in the town where we met the Pakistani kebab house workers, and then 5 or 6 of them gang raped me. I knew 3 of them from the kebab house, but the others I'd never met before. There were 3 kebab houses in the town, and they all knew each other, and they linked up when they raped me. They were all linked. We were trafficked to Telford, Hereford and Blackpool. I was 14 and 15 during this period when I was raped and trafficked regularly. My mum was so happy that I'd found friends, but she had no idea what was going on.
Just as I'd found in Rotherham and Rochdale, the gangs of abusers used the boyfriend model of exploitation to lure in their victims.
While my abusers threatened, raped and violated me, they were also kind, but it would change. They called us gory girls, white bitches, white slags. When I eventually got my police records back, there are 200 to 300 pages about how I'd been strangled, threatened with a knife, someone was sent to petrol bomb my house. I was raped over 1,000 times and I don't even know how many men assaulted me. It was just a thing that happened to us and it might sound crazy, but it was just normal. It felt normal. It's all we knew.
Emily's suffering represents one story in a much wider pattern of abuse. This crisis was not isolated to a few towns. It had swept the country. Reports from Rotherham, Rochdale and Telford were joined by stories from dozens of other towns and cities. This national scandal required a national response. been a secret. This lack of responsibility and community punishment has been linked to clannish attitudes among British Pakistanis. To learn more, I sat down with Wazeek, a British Pakistani Muslim researcher.
I think there is a culture within some of these British Pakistani communities where the perpetrators feel that white working class girls do not equal the same as those within their own community.
When Ruby was interviewed, in her video interview, she said in evidence that she had been chosen by this man because she was a white girl, and these men wanted a white girl to abuse. She also talked of them passing her round in a circle as though she was a ball, with a circle of Pakistani abusers who would go into a flat and they would use that flat for the night. They'd take one white girl into that flat and they would all abuse her.
But many people were desperate to blur the lines. One of the ways they ensured the focus was not put on British Pakistanis was through the use of the umbrella term Asian, which deflected attention away from the sad reality.
I think the term Asian isn't always appropriate. When we do look at, again, the demographic of perpetrators, we are seeing that they're mostly British Pakistanis.
I know that these gangs are often referred to as Asian grooming gangs, but I would always say, well, I have yet to come across any man from Thailand or Japan or China who are involved in these grooming gangs. They are predominantly Pakistani, British, Muslim men. And that is not racist, it is a fact.
If the police, councils, government and the media had confronted the stark truth about the grooming gangs, the abuse of thousands of girls could have been avoided. Failing to accept these facts has allowed hundreds, if not thousands of abusers to hide behind the veil of political correctness.
We've seen some British Pakistanis who have been reluctant to deal with this issue and have been in absolute denial that this issue is taking place. The reason why is because they don't want to bring shame on their own family.
I think the racial dynamics of this particular kind of sexual abuse have meant that it has not been discussed in the way it should have been in the media, because people in positions of authority have always been frightened of being called racist. With this particular kind of crime, it is irrefutable, in my experience from all the cases that I have dealt with, that the vast majority of the abusers in these cases are Pakistani men.
Political correctness doesn't just mean good manners, it has consequences. And one of those consequences was the abandonment of thousands of girls to years of abuse for fear that tackling the problem would look